Hi, this is Krista Walsh.
Hey, this is Daniel Arthur Smith.
Hey, this is Terry R. Hill.
Hey, it's Josh Hayes, and you're listening to
30-minute author interviews
with my friend Preston Lay.
Woohoo! Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. We do have a giveaway with this week's episode, but before I tell you about it, I want to tell you about our sponsor, The Galactic Satori Chronicles by Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks. The Galactic Satori Chronicles. A thirst for revenge sends one man on a deadly journey through the galaxy in this adrenaline-pumping new series. Asher is a young man whose world is turned upside down when he discovers that his fiancée's death has been directly caused by an imminent alien invasion. In a desire to better understand humans in order to destroy them, these aliens are projecting their consciousness into unsuspecting men and women, and in the process are learning exactly how to use humanity's own selfishness and greed as weapons against them. Fueled by emotions that the aliens will never understand, Asher bands together with a group of friends. These four MIT co-eds are more than meets the eye and go to battle with those who are intent on destroying our planet. Asher takes the fight from Earth to an alien spaceship and then to the very planet of the enemy trying to destroy them. The Galactic Satori Chronicles can be found on Amazon, where you can get Book 1 Earth for 99 cents and Book 2 Kron for $2.99. So head on over to Amazon and search for Galactic Satori Chronicles, or you can head on over to Leigendarium.com and check out the show notes for this episode. In the show notes, we'll include the link to where you can find both Book 1 and Book 2 of the Galactic Satori Chronicles on Amazon. Rhett Bruno is our guest this week, and he would like to give 3 people the chance to win an ebook copy of his latest novel, From Ice to Ashes. All you need to do to get registered is listen to this episode, and then head on over to Leigendarium.com, find the show notes for this episode, and let us know in the comments what was your favorite part of this episode. It's as simple as that. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy our interview with Rhett Bruno. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. Our guest this week is author Rhett Bruno. Thanks for coming on and doing 30-Minute Author Interviews.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So we start out each episode here with a little segment that we call Two Truths and a Lie. So if you could... I can't remember how many I've gotten wrong or right in a row now. I've lost track, but I think I've got more wrong than right. But do you have 2 truths and a lie that you can tell me, and I can maybe guess it and try to get it right?
Yeah, I tried to think of some that might stump you. All right, so let's see. My first is my book Titanborn was pitched to Paramount by an A-list producer and screenwriting team. Next, I won a ping pong championship on a celebrity cruise. And then I once shared a beer with Patrick Rothfuss at a Random House event, and we got to discuss some minor plot points on his 3rd book.
Oh, man. All of those sound so cool. And all of them sound like there would be a cool story with any of them. Man, dang it. I always say for some reason, but there's really no reason behind my guessing. But I want to say my first thought is to say that Patrick Rothfuss one is not true, that's the lie, but that could be right. I keep thinking about the ping pong thing. Man, I'm just going to have to flip a coin. I'm going to say... I hope Patrick Rothfuss is true, because that would be an amazing story. So I'm gonna say the lie is winning a ping pong tournament on a celebrity cruise.
Wrong again.
Dang it!
Your first thought was right. It was the Patrick Rothfuss.
Darn, I was hoping it was true, so you could kind of...
I did meet him at a Random House event at New York Comic Con, but it was like going up to him, shaking his hand, saying you're a big fan. Then there were every author in the whole room lit up when he came in and just stopped talking to each other and tried to get close to him.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. It was like the president walked in.
I have his books. I haven't really started them yet. I hear great things about them, but I don't know if I want to start it yet when we don't have a release date for the book 3.
I thought 3 was coming out 2 years ago when I read them both right in a row, and I don't usually read books that are longer than like 300 pages because it takes so long.
Yeah,
but I dove into his, and his writing is amazing, and now I've just been waiting.
Yeah,
but it was still pretty cool to meet someone on that level.
Yeah. Yeah, he is definitely on another level for sure. So Titanborn was pitched, to Paramount?
Yeah, to Paramount. It was right after Ben-Hur came out and bombed for them. They passed. I had a film agent connected to it. I don't know what's going on with it anymore, but it was a pretty cool moment that ended up with nothing happening, as I'm sure.
So did someone... what's the story behind it getting pitched? Like, did they come to you and say, "Hey, we'd like to pitch your story. I read it," or did you go?
One day, I guess it was over a year ago. My literary agent called me and he was like, "We have this film agent that loved the book and is interested in pitching it." I was like, "Oh, okay." I mean, like, I don't know if I have the sales for a studio to want to pick it up for a movie, but let's go for it.
Right.
And it was before the book even came out. So he just liked the story, and he brought on, I'm technically not allowed to say their names for some reason, even though nothing is happening. But It was two pretty big name producers. One had worked on Return of the Jedi as like an assistant producer, and now does the Transformers movie. So some pretty big stuff. And they got in front of Paramount, and Paramount passed. No reasons given, probably just that it would be too expensive, and the guy told me they're in a pretty rough spot right now. Then they were supposed to keep pitching to more studios and bring on a director, but I haven't heard from anyone in like 6 months, which I'm sure plenty of authors have dealt with similar situations.
Right. So what's the story behind this celebrity cruise and winning a ping pong championship thing?
So I might have tricked you a little. By celebrity, I meant the company.
Okay.
Not like a cruise just with celebrities on it.
Dang, that would have been cool.
But no, it was our senior trip in high school.
Oh, okay.
And my friend woke me up to play ping pong, and back then I was really good at ping pong, and I happened to win the tournament.
Wow. Even
though I was sleeping when he woke me up and almost didn't even want to play. And he was pretty pissed because I beat him in the championship.
That's great.
But yeah, that was a fun tournament.
My dad used to work at a company, and one of their employees is a professional. They call it table tennis.
Oh, yeah.
He's a professional table tennis player, and he was an alternate for the Olympic team. And so I got to go watch him play a couple times. Watching those professionals is just unreal.
Yeah, it's a whole nother level. I mean, I was like one of the best in my high school.
Right.
We had no team or anything. That's right. So it wasn't much competition.
That's funny. Well, for my listeners that might not know who you are and what you do, can you kind of give them a little intro on who you are and what you do? Yeah.
So basically, I've been writing for a really long time. After college was when I really started to get back into science fiction. Mostly when I was growing up, I wrote fantasy. That's really all I read. And high school kind of, took away my desire to read, as it can do when they force you to read those books.
Right.
And then I read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which isn't straight sci-fi, it's post-apocalypse, but that really got me like into telling stories again. And I started reading Heinlein and a lot of those guys. I read the Thrawn trilogy, which I got to meet that author. That was pretty cool. And I started writing The Circuit, Executive Rising, which was my first science fiction book. Published that with a small press and released the whole trilogy. And then was able to get an agent with my next book, which is called Titanborn. And I've been working with him ever since, trying to put things out. Takes a little longer because I'm in the traditional route, and with him, it's with Random House. So it takes him around a year to publish a book anyway. So that's what I've been working on. I have things that are finished that aren't published and things like that, but it's a slow process, but that's basically what I do.
Right. And so you said growing up that you like to write and read growing up. What was it that you loved growing up about writing and reading?
I actually, this is a little bit of a personal story, but growing up, I dealt with sort of a mental condition.
Uh-huh.
And a psychiatrist told me, why don't you try writing down stories or thinking up stories to sort of distract yourself? Because I had sort of an obsessive thought syndrome.
Uh-huh.
I don't really remember what the exact name was. So that's what I started doing. I started writing down stories based on, and video games were a huge influence back then. So I'd write like a Diablo story or a Soul Reaver story or anything about one of my favorite games. And, I started getting more and more into it until I convinced myself to write a fantasy novel. And at 16 was sort of swindled by a vanity press into publishing it through them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which was a big regret because I definitely was not ready to publish anything. It was the first real novel I'd ever written, and it didn't do very well. So I sort of put out all of those because I had written the entire trilogy, and they were like, oh, let's publish all these, and nothing happened. They put them out for crazy prices. So I have to say one thing to any aspiring writers is to watch out for those. Mm-hmm. And so after those came out and it was kind of a big letdown, I sort of stopped for a little, which fell in line with me going to architecture school in college, which some listeners might know it's usually the most brutal program at any college as far as staying up late and giving us way too much work than any human could do.
Right.
So I sort of slowed down on reading and writing anything. And it was like fourth year, which usually happens, everyone starts slowly getting tired of architecture because it's a focused program. It's all we do. So that was when I really got into reading these golden age science fiction writers, the kind of stuff that I wish they taught us in high school, but they never do. And said we get to read Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
So I started reading things I actually enjoy. And it really started with the Thrawn trilogy, the Star Wars Thrawn trilogy. And I was like, wow, I didn't even realize there were Star Wars books, and if you could write such a cool book out of a world that I love, maybe science fiction is better for me than writing fantasy, because those were the movies I loved. And so that's how I started really getting into it. And you'll see in a lot of my reviews and a lot of the influences, people saying there's sort of that 60s sci-fi feel to it.
Right.
And it's not even necessary that I'm going for it, but that's a lot of my base self-education on writing science fiction comes from that time period. And I tried to add some three-dimensional characters more than the great world building they did, but that's a lot of my influence right there.
Okay. And you said that you put out the circuit once you did that. Now, did you put that out self-published first, and then has it been picked up now by a traditional publisher? So
again, I'm like poster child for all the things you shouldn't do in publishing. Because I know so many authors now, and they all teach each other stuff, and I didn't know no one in my high school went into writing. No teachers at college, because I was in architecture. I didn't know any writing professors or anything like that. So I went for small presses, and I got the circuit, and I don't like to mention who the companies are, but I got the circuit picked up by a small press who they seemed pretty legitimate. They had some big authors in it, but they only really focus on those one or two big authors, and the rest of it, they really put you in sort of a writing mill. Uh-huh. And I didn't realize that at the time, we put out a cover, we published the book, everything was great. I did all my own marketing. I got a ton of great reviews on it and all that kind of stuff. And then some of the reviews came in and they were complaining about the editing, which I then realized their editor wasn't an in-house editor, it was a freelance editor brought in. And I don't even remember who it was, but she did a very poor job on it. And so that kind of hurt sales a little bit, was where people would literally read the book and write a review like, oh, I love this story, but whoever this editor was really didn't do this author any favors. stuff like that. And I'm a firm believer that, writing a book is a team effort. And if you don't have a good editor helping you out, it's going to come out a little rough, no matter how good of a writer you are. And so I was able, because I knew I wasn't going to let them just edit it alone and I'd have to pay for an editor anyway, I asked to get my rights back, which luckily they let me for not too much, a pretty small price. They let me get my rights back, and I was able to get the book picked up by Diversion Books, who's a small press out of New York City, but I heard nothing but good things about their editing. And, I thought it was kind of too late to self-publish and try to launch it myself. So, and I didn't have the money to pay for editing myself. So I went with Diversion Books and worked with an editor there named Randall Klein, who I don't think he's with them anymore, but I think he edits on his own now, but he's probably one of the best editors I've ever worked with, taught me a lot, and he helped me put together that entire trilogy and put it out through Diversion Books, and they've made all new covers, and they relaunched the first book. And so it's been a nice thing to have on my backlist, a full trilogy that I think came out really well, and I'm thankful that I was able to get out of that bad situation and into a better one. Right,
exactly. So then you have Titanborn, which you said was picked up by Random House. How did that getting picked up by Random House with Titanborn? How did that come along?
So that's actually a funny and random story in that my girlfriend, who I started dating probably midway through when I was publishing the circuit, and I had this novella manuscript, and that was Titanborn was just a novella. I had written it as like a short story to submit to the Writers of the Future contest and stuff. And it was pretty long, so it was technically a novella at like 20,000 words, which you could still submit there. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was better written than the circuit, and probably the best thing I had ever written as far as being a pretty moving and powerful story. So one day, my girlfriend's mom said, "Rhett, at my book club, the president of some literary agency in New York City is one of the members." And she had been going to this book club for years and just found out what this woman did for her life. So she set up a call where I would just call her and ask for advice on publishing. And then the agent asked at the end, like, "Do you have anything ready to submit?" And I was like, "Not a book. I have this manuscript for a novella, but I know those are a hard sell for publishers, so I didn't really know what to do with it." She was like, "Well, just send it over and I'll give you some notes on it." And I almost forgot about that. And then about 4 months later, I get an email from someone else who works there. No, my agent, Mike Hoogland, now he's my agent, emailed saying that his boss didn't like it because she doesn't like science fiction. But she thought it was written well, so she handed it off to him, and he emailed me saying that he loved it, but he can't do anything really with a novella, and asked, like, he'll represent me and he'll try to sell it as a novella, but would I want to try to expand it into a novel? So that I went ahead and did that with just a little bit of feedback from him, expanded into a novel, and we started submitting. It took a little bit, and that's how it ended. So it was just a pretty random acquiring of an agent, where I've probably submitted things to like 8,000 agents, and the one that I didn't actually submit it to is the one that wound up responding.
That's funny. Well, before we dive into Titanborn for a minute, since we talked about the circuit, why don't you let the listeners know kind of what the book blurb on what the circuit is before we move on to Titanborn?
Yeah, so the idea for the circuit came from something pretty innocent. I was just watching Star Wars one day and thinking, like, how do all these spaceships have gravity on them? And no one ever questions it. No one ever explains it. And the same in Star Trek. And then I Googled, like, there's like a 1-sentence explanation in Star Trek for it, and it's just a throwaway, and that's it. You just accept it. So I was like, well, what if I develop a story around an Earth that discovers some new element that allows us to generate artificial gravity fields? Because then all these problems with living in space and space travel and stuff, they go away because we're able to generate an artificial gravity. So the idea was that we discover this element, which they call gravitum, deep in the Earth's mantle. But because they overmine it, Earth pretty much falls apart, and now it forces humans to live off of Earth. And that's the setting. And I take it 500 years from there, where we're already pretty settled into living around Earth, and a group called the New Earth Tribunal has risen up, and they worship the Earth like Earth is God. And if we redeem ourselves, the Earth will heal itself and allow us to return. So that's this powerful group. And, it's kind of a pretty gritty, dark space opera mix, like taking Star Wars and flipping it on its head and pushing it to the darkness level. I mean, the first chapter starts off with the main character's android companion ripping someone's head off.
Nice.
Because he has no feeling. He's just killing. So I wanted to tell this story of this main character, Cassius Vale, who used to work. He was a member of this tribunal council, and his son dies on Earth. And it sort of drives him mad. And he goes on this mad quest to get revenge against Earth, which you can't. Earth isn't a being. It's not a person. So he kind of goes on this mad quest to rewrite civilization in his image. And it brings a few other characters. So the book balances 4 different characters who are thrust into this situation. He starts when he secretly uses this android creation to start robbing Gravitum from the Tribune, and they don't know who it is. They blame their rivals, and he sort of kickstarts this whole war just to get revenge. And so it's a pretty character-driven space opera sort of story that I think is a little unique in the way the story unfolds over the trilogy, in that it's not really about the war. It's about these characters getting thrust into this war and him trying to come to terms with his son dying, which he just can't seem to do.
That's awesome. And all that came from how does gravity work on Star Wars?
Yeah, just watching one of the episodes, just wondering, like, well, that's bullshit. How can that?
That's funny. That's pretty interesting. I think I remember hearing you mention that one time, and I always, man, it sticks with you. That's interesting. So, before we jump into Titanborn, why don't you kind of let the listeners know the little book blurb on Titanborn?
Okay. Yeah. So I'll try not to just read it, so I could give something a little different. So basically, Titanborn is the story of a bounty hunter who in that world they call collectors. And it's a sort of far future. It's a 24th century. And a meteorite struck Earth around our time in 2030, and it nearly left the planet unlivable, but a few humans survived. And during that tragedy, one person named Darian Trass brought a generational arc ship to Titan. So in the present of the book, there have been people that have survived on Earth and have built their civilization back up, and then a completely separate group of humans who have started civilization on Titan and Saturn. And so that's where the book takes place. Is there's been a great reunion between the two groups, but the humans bring over germs from Earth, and these germs lead to the people who live on Titans, who I call ringers, as the Saturn has a ring, so that's sort of the derogatory term for them, have gotten really sick. They have what it's called the Ringer Plague, and they've been forced to be put in quarantine and stuff like that just to survive these Earth germs. And there's always a question of whether the corporations who run Earth now did that on purpose to take control of Saturn, because it's such a wealth of resources, from the gas that lets them run their ships, methane lakes on Titan, metal, ice, all sorts of resources. Titan almost became like the golden world of our solar system. And so that's what this main character is, a bounty hunter named Malcolm Graves, and it's his job to sort of put down riots and unrest in off-world colonies for the corporation he works for, which is Provenio Corporation. They're the most powerful in the solar system because they're the ones who organized the reunion with Titan and took over Saturn. And I'll keep going if you want.
Oh, it's we don't want to spoil it for anybody.
Yeah, that's the main premise. So basically this bounty hunter gets caught up in a conspiracy that the Ringers are putting forth to sort of spark a rebellion. Mm-hmm. And he gets caught up in it. And as he's trying to solve a terrorist bombing on Earth, shadows of his past come up, and he's this older guy. He's around 55, 60 years old, coming to the edge of his career, and he knows it. And that's what he's dealing with as he's trying to find these terrorists, and things do not go how he expects.
So what was your inspiration for that story?
My inspiration for that story? I mean, it's very shades of Blade Runner.
Okay.
From the main character, the way he dresses, the way he talks, and it's got cyberpunk qualities, but without being full cyberpunk, because it expands beyond Earth. So it's that kind of stuff, the sci-fi noir sort of books. So
do you know what it was, or where you were when you got the idea for the story?
I can't remember. I had this overarching story where explaining the end sort of spoils it, but I had this ending, this really awful no-win choice that the main character winds up in.
Okay.
And kind of everything built towards that moment. Even when it was from when it was a short story to a novel, it was building toward that moment between the main character and his very young, very talented partner that he almost feels like is going to replace them. And then they sort of bond like Lethal Weapon. The two cops put together who aren't the same, they sort of bond by the end, only they're such polar opposites. And that was, to build this emotional moment at the end.
Okay. Now you said that you started out and it was just it was 20,000 word novella length story. What was your process into turning it into a novel? Was it hard to turn it into a novel?
Hard in that it took a while, not hard in that I loved this world. Writing in it was probably my favorite thing to write. And it was my first time actually writing a book in first person. I love writing in first person. It's just often hard to do when you're in a big space opera with multiple characters. So I got to really get inside of this character's head, and expanding the story wasn't hard at all. I gave him a daughter and a background, and tried to really humanize him, and that was able to add a lot to the story. But the overarching points, the story structure, never really changed. It was just about taking what I had and really pushing it to the limit as far as the world and the characters and development.
Okay. So one of the fan questions comes from Terry Maggart, and he was wanting to know, how does the advance of science help or hinder your space operas?
Well, it'll probably hurt it if they make an advancement that makes something in my book seem stupid. That's the main thing. I mean, when I write, I try to research as much as I can just to get a base understanding, and then not harp on the technology in the book. I don't really write techno-babble sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Just try to make it as believable as possible and then go from there. So I don't know how much it would affect me. I mean, unless we start settling other worlds in our solar system or find a way to get to TRAPPIST and settle those planets or something. I don't know how much advances would really change anything, because in the end, regardless of what technology I put in, my main focus is character-driven stories.
Okay. So you mentioned research. How much research went into Titanborn? What kind of things did you have to learn about in order to write that story?
I think the circuit required more research because I was doing a pretty advanced far future.
Okay.
Whereas in Titanborn, the meteorite hitting results in a pretty stagnant growth, and it's only the development of ion engines that allows us to move at least a little quicker to other planets in that book and start colonizing. There's sort of this drive to colonize because people are afraid that another meteorite will kill all of humanity. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of this exploration mandate that comes similar to what you would see from Europe in like the 1700s. And yeah. Okay. I think that's it. I mean, as far as Titanborn, it was just really about researching the effects of gravity.
Okay.
That was a big one because it's also first person, and this is from like a pretty rugged, older bounty hunter. He doesn't really know or care about technology. He just uses what he has.
Okay.
And so that was a lot of where the fun came into it, was him dealing with geniuses and being not really caring about things that they have to say when they explain things. It's just purely from his eyes.
Gotcha. So now you, for those that don't know, you just recently released a new novel called From Ice to Ashes, which is in the Titanborn universe. Why don't you kind of let the people know the non-spoiler blurb on what that story's about?
Yeah. So Titanborn, when I originally wrote it, was written as a standalone, but it sort of sets up this world, and I always had ideas to expand it. So where Titanborn tells the story from the perspective of a man from Earth who has to keep down these off-worlders, From Ice to Ashes totally flips, and it actually takes place at the exact same time as Titanborn, but from a completely different perspective. So from the perspective of one of these beleaguered ringers who has to deal with living under the boot of a corporation and making poor money because they don't view them as important as Earthers, So there's strong elements of racism towards these ringers throughout, and that's a lot of the early portions of the book are him dealing with that. The main character, whose name is Cal Drayton. And so I wanted to tell pretty much the spark of the revolution. I know people are gonna hate it because Titanborn ends with sort of one portion of the spark of a revolution from one side of the story, and then this book tells the other, the finishing of the spark. And so the revolution will start after this in the next book in this series, whenever that comes out. But this is kind of like the full kicker. I wanted to tell the story of this guy who winds up trapped up in a terrorist organization without even meaning to. Just his mom is sick. He wants to save her. He gets an offer to save her, and he doesn't know who he's dealing with. And it just so happens that they're members of the Children of Titan, who are this extremist terrorist organization who want to completely break away from Earth. And so it's sort of interesting in that Titanborn is a redemption story, and this is almost a fall story. I like to compare it to the fall of Anakin into Darth Vader.
Okay.
And it's a pretty drastic arc from just this kid who is pretty much being a pickpocket just to make money so he could pay for his mom's treatment, to what he grows into being involved in this terrorist organization.
Now, when you wrote Titanborn, did you get the idea From Ice to Ashes as you were writing Titanborn, or did it come later on?
So I reached the end of Titanborn, and as we were submitting, I was like, well, if everyone passes on this, what should I do? So I started writing From Ice to Ashes as an alternating chapter. So you would read one chapter from the perspective of Malcolm Graves, who's the main character in Titanborn, and then the next from the perspective of Cal Drayton, who's the main character in From Ice to Ashes, because their stories have a lot of overlapping moments that neither of them realize because they never actually even meet each other. But the effects of one affects the other. So that's why I kind of call these like companion novels. You could read them standalone and you'll get everything. Mm-hmm. But if you read both, there'll be little hints and little things, like when soldiers all of a sudden are in a room, you'll understand, they're going to deal with something this other character did. So they sort of connect like that, and it all comes together to tell about this sudden spark of a revolution that none of the Earther corporations could have expected on this level. And I don't think the terrorists even expected. It's just sort of this offhand chance that what could happen to spark it.
Okay. Now you said that they're kind of companion novels. Is there a particular order you would recommend people reading them in?
Probably I would read Titanborn first. They're also, they're pretty different too. You have one that's very sci-fi noir and one that's more of a space opera thriller adventure.
Okay.
So I think Titanborn probably gives you more insight into the universe because he starts on Earth, he goes to the moon, then he goes over to Titan. Mm-hmm. Whereas From Ice to Ashes just takes place around Saturn, on Titan, and in Saturn's atmosphere. So it's a little more contained. Mm-hmm. But I definitely think whichever one you want to dive into, whichever type of story appeals to you more, maybe start with that one. And I think anyone who reads one of them and likes them would like the other.
Okay. Now, did you have to do a bunch of research to learn about Saturn and its atmosphere and everything like that? Or is that stuff you already knew?
I knew a little bit from the circuit because Titan did play a major role in that book as a setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of pushed it for this book. I was researching which moon in our solar system would be the best to send people to. That's the whole idea of this guy who tried to escape the meteorite. And, I was between Titan and I think it was Europa, but I had this name, Titanborn, in my head, and Europaborn sounded horrible. So I sort of pushed as much as I could the idea that Titan and Saturn had a surplus of gases and natural resources, anything humanity that could need except for breathable air. and it has the thick atmosphere. So there were a toss-up between the two planets, but, I researched what gases were in Saturn that might be used for ion engines, that kind of stuff. Just small little things that could be referenced here and there from the perspective of a character living in that world. So things like you or I would learn at high school, not what a scientist would be able to tell you, because, again, they're telling the story. It's very focused on what they see.
Well, I do think Titanborn does sound better than the other one, Europaborn. Yeah, Titanborn sounds a whole lot better.
Yeah, it really left me no choice. I was like, well, there's like that and Enceladus, and no, Titanborn sounds too cool for me to not force using that planet.
Yeah,
but I think I made it work technologically in the book as far as that was just kind of first choice.
Right. Yeah, I think it turned out great. While you're here, I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about this new group that you've started called Sci-Fi Bridge. Why don't you kind of let people know who and what Sci-Fi Bridge is?
Yeah, so it was started by me and two indie author friends, actually, Chris Porcio and Jason Anspa. Mm-hmm. And, they're both like at the same level as I am, where we're like mid-list, not bestsellers yet, and kind of frustrated wanting to get more sales and not being able to do things on our own, like being reliant on sources like BookBub and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I had this like real inkling of an idea, like, why don't we try to bring together as many science fiction authors as we possibly can? And instead of, working together or doing the normal cross promotion things where you do it once and it's over and there's nothing to ever really do with that list, to bring all these people together and we market giveaways, these awesome giveaways through each other's mailing lists. So we have bestsellers, we have emerging authors, we have traditional, we have independent, whoever we could bring in. It didn't matter how they published as long as they wrote good science fiction. And so we tried to bring in the best pure science fiction authors that we could. And we made this group. We ran our first giveaway and it killed. We were offering signed books and ebooks, and it wound up working. And I mean, we build this to everyone. Like, we're going to do all the work. We're going to put this together, and it'll be a huge cross-promotion platform where we could help each other, but mostly get readers good science fiction. That's instead of focusing on only trying to help ourselves, which is a lot of what happens. It was, we're going to put in a ton of work to bring these books to readers, and hopefully they want it. So the experiment worked. We ran this giveaway, and the people that sign up for the giveaway get subscribed to our mailing list where we promote science fiction books that are on sale or new releases. And we ran a first few, and we wound up getting over 100 sales on each one, which is pretty crazy for a group that we built based on giveaways and bringing them together to get these free books and a chance for signed books and everything that these subscribers were also willing to buy, because we must have tapped a nerve and found people that just love science fiction and they want it, whether it's free or they have to pay for it. And so, yeah, we've just been building from there and building our list, and every promo has been a success so far. We're not in any way on the level of BookBub, right. Which I don't believe there's any group on there, but I've used plenty of similar platforms to BookBub where you put your book up on sale, they send it out in a newsletter or whatever, and you're supposed to get some sales for it. And you have to pay. and usually you get like 5 sales from that directly. Mm-hmm. And what we're offering is that if our authors, any author that we bring in, and we have rules and guidelines that we look at to see who we can bring in, because we want to make sure our readers are getting the best science fiction possible, they get all that for free. So we do all the work, we set up the promos, we put it out, and we give it to readers. And now we put together our first anthology, which is called At the Helm, and that's been selling really well. We put out a calling in our group to see who wants to put a story into this anthology, and we'll use it just to gain exposure. It's not about bringing money, it's about exposing authors to new readers, because we have traditional and indie. So we have people, even if they're bestsellers, that have access to a new fan base through us, because we're not really saying who's publishing how. We're sort of blurring that boundary for the readers. And so, we've just been building it, and we're still in our 4-month launch time frame that we put forward to everybody. This is experimental time frame to make sure it actually worked. And so far it's working really well. And we are bringing in new science fiction authors every once in a while. We have bestsellers I never even imagined would respond to my emails in the group, which is pretty exciting and pretty cool. And you have people there that you could learn a lot from in our private chats and groups. And it's been pretty great.
That is awesome. So you said that y'all just put on an anthology called At the Helm. Who ended up, who had the idea for the anthology? And then do all the stories in the anthology kind of tie together, or are they all individual stories?
It was my idea. I kind of, I'm the youngest one in the group, and sort of was frustrated by things going on with publishers. So I wanted to sort of take a platform into my own hand. Mm-hmm. So I pushed a lot of ideas, and we wanted to do an anthology, but I was like, I'm going to put it together now. So me and a friend, Steve Bielu, he's my friend. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Put out the call and just asked people to submit stories. And so me and him on a whim put together this At the Helm, this first Sci-Fi Bridge anthology. And I told him I would put the work into it to get it out this fast, because I think it'll be cool to correlate. So for every giveaway, or most of the giveaways, because we probably can't work that fast, to provide a free Sci-Fi Bridge anthology to everyone who signs up for the giveaway. And then after that, it goes on sale. So anyone who signs up or is a subscriber gets this exclusive chance to get the anthology. And then after that, it goes on to sale and is on Amazon or wherever to give exposure to all the authors that are inside of it. Mm-hmm. So we knew that we couldn't put together a themed anthology that fast if it had like a really connected theme. So it was basically just science fiction. It wound up being pretty either pulpy or really like focused science fiction, like robots, generational arc ships, mm-hmm. space travel, stuff like that. So more far future kind of stuff in there. So the stories really work with each other. We made sure that there was a nice flow to it. But no, there's no connection between any of the stories.
Okay. Yeah, y'all got some great names in that first volume of At the Helm. And
we have like 15 more stories that are waiting to be placed in the second volume. And I was like, well, that might be too many to put in the second volume, so we might have to do a third now. And it's exhausting, but I think in the end it'll work out. And I think the readers are really enjoying this chance to find new authors, because it is hard to go on Amazon and find anything new that you aren't already searching for. Mm-hmm. Unless they're on like the hot new releases page and places like that. So I think it's a great way for us to tell people about deals. And I'll boast a little bit here, but we've found that our subscribers that we brought in are really active. Mm-hmm. So something is clicking with them because they respond, and it's not like I've done a book club before and sold tons of books and gotten maybe one review posted out of it. Mm-hmm. Whereas we'll do this and you'll sell like 100 books. And even if you only get 5 reviews, I mean, that percentage of people that are actually reading it and leaving a review and not just collecting as many deals as they can seems higher than in other programs. And I think that's the way we're putting this together, as just pure for science fiction. And it's not a group of friends. We're not a group of friends in a group. Like me and the guys who started it all sort of knew each other and are friends, but most of the authors in there I have never met or spoken to at all until I sent a cold email out saying, hey, do you want to join this, cross-promotion science fiction focus group?
Yeah. Well, I'm part of it. I get the emails, and there's definitely some great stuff going out with your Sci-Fi bridge. So people definitely need to check it out. Well, here at the Leigendarium at 30-minute author interviews, we like to end each episode on a segment that we call the legendary ending. These questions are kind of book related, but kind of not. So the first question in the legendary ending is, what songs are currently on your writing playlist?
I've been listening to the Westworld soundtrack on repeat.
Okay.
It's like the perfect blend of cool twists on like real songs and then, of course, their own original songs. And I've definitely been listening to that a lot. And then always anything from Hans Zimmer. I tend to not be able to listen to anything with words as I'm writing because I'll start writing words I'm hearing instead of what I mean to. Yeah. So mostly instrumental stuff. And I try to keep the theme with what I'm writing, to make them correlate a little bit.
Question number 2 is, if you were stuck in a zombie apocalypse, which one of your book characters would you want to be stuck with and why?
That's pretty easy if it's someone that's going to keep me alive. I would pick Malcolm Graves from Titanborn, mostly because he's pretty sarcastic and cynical, so that would make me laugh the whole time. Mm-hmm. And he's also a pretty well-trained sort of agent and would be able to keep me safe from zombies, where I probably would die in about a minute on my own.
Right. If you were stuck in a zombie apocalypse, but you could pick any character from any media source, whether it's movies, books, comics, whatever, who would you want to be stuck with and why?
Oh, that's really tough. I'm going to be weird and just go with, like, in his prime, Darth Vader.
Oh, okay.
Because no one's going to touch us.
True. That's actually a first. No one's ever said Darth Vader before.
I mean, he may not be one for conversation, but you'll being alone with one other person forever, you'll get bored of them eventually anyway. So it might as well just have someone that can keep you alive, or if he gets mad at you, end things quick.
That's true. That's funny. The next question is, if you had a time machine, where would you travel and why?
As much as it probably actually would suck in real life, I would want to go to Roman times. That was my favorite subject in school, was classical history. I studied architecture in college, so we had to do a lot of studying of Roman ruins. So just to see what it's really like back then and, see how different it is from my favorite movies like Gladiator.
Yeah.
And of course, that's imagining I can't go to the future, obviously, right?
Oh, you can go to the future if you want.
Oh, well, yeah, then I don't even know. Then I might want to see what happens in the future and if I got anything right.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I had to, when I was going to school for graphic design, I had to take an art history class, and it was all we studied was different architectural features from way back, the Roman times and other ones. Man, it was one of the hardest classes I ever took.
Yeah, I was pretty good at that in architecture school.
Yeah,
I happened to be an architectural history minor, so those were my usual side classes outside of my main curriculum.
You probably would have loved the class. I hated it. I was awful.
so did everyone else in there.
Yeah, it's so hard. So the next question is, if you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
Flying would be pretty cool, but I think I would want to have whatever Professor X has.
True.
It's telepathy and everything else, and he could freeze time, and he could form little worlds in his brain and tell people what to do and find out what they want to do. It just seems like like the end all power. Like you could have super strength, but I could just stop you with my mind.
Yep, that's true. The question that we are famous for here is: a penguin walks through the door right now wearing a sombrero. What does he say, and why is he here?
I guess he'd probably ask me where his money is. I'm picturing that penguin from Billy Madison. I don't know if you remember him. Just showing up at my door to steal my girlfriend in his sombrero and flowered shirt, just like in the movie.
That's hilarious. Before we leave, do you have any advice, whether it be for writing or for life, that you would like to share with the listeners?
I get mostly only for writers out there, just to definitely read the genre that you're writing in and to not be afraid of getting feedback. I have a lot of people ask me questions or ask me to look at things, and it's just been sitting in their shelf for 2 years and they don't want to self-publish, which is fine. They want to submit to people, but you can't submit to people by not submitting to people. Right. And so, I mean, where I learned most about writing was from submitting to editors at publishing houses and the ones that actually sent feedback, or then eventually signed me, and then working with those editors. You learn a lot about not just telling a story, but writing in general, pacing, all that sort of stuff. And then the other thing is to not be a 16-year-old idiot like I was and research the field before you jump at any publisher or doing anything, just so you don't wind up in a horrible deal with books you can't get the rights back for. Right.
Well, that is good advice. Where can our listeners go if they would like to learn more about you and your stories?
Yeah, so my major novels, not my short stories or anything, but my novels are available at any digital retailer. The Circuit series is available in print on demand, and so you could go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon if you want to go directly to my work. If you want to find out more about me personally, you can go to my website at www.rhettbruno.com. I keep it simple because I'm probably the only Rhett author out there. Or they could follow me on Facebook, which I use my personal Facebook. That's the best way to, if you want to listen to things I have to say or get to know me better. And Twitter is usually similar. So those are the main places.
Okay. Well, we'll throw links to all that over in the show notes over at the Leigendarium. One final question is, what can your fans expect from you in 2017?
Well, that all depends on my publishers. I'm still waiting to hear back on a sequel to For Mice to Ashes and Titanborn that brings those two characters together and sort of gives us the myths of the revolution on Titan and this changing world. Mm-hmm. I have another manuscript that's on submission with some pretty big publishers. I'm hoping to land. Who knows what'll happen, and that obviously takes a while, which I personally think it's my best and most unique manuscript ever. I sort of took it out of the box and moved away from the space opera roots and did more of a It's pretty hard to explain. It's like 18 million subgenres, but it's science fiction, but it's a little different than anything I've written before. I don't want to say anything until it's with anybody. And then right now I'm working on an alt history, Cold War era alien first contact book.
Oh, nice.
The start of a series, which I'm writing with a co-author. I brought someone else on to help me with the story because I have never written in the real world before. Mm-hmm. So, and neither has he. So me and him are sort of trying to put this book together, and with two people working on it, it might come out quicker. But as far as 2017, for major novels, For Mice to Ashes might be it, but there'll be a bunch of anthologies I'm appearing in coming out. We'll be putting out one as soon as we can. We'll be putting out more through Sci-Fi Bridge. So I have a lot of focus on putting them out there. I'm in the Wool anthology Sam Peralta's putting out, a superhero anthology someone's putting out. So there'll be stuff. I just don't know if it'll be any full-length novels.
Okay. And where can people go if they want to learn more about Sci-Fi Bridge or sign up for it?
So Sci-Fi Bridge, we keep it pretty simple on our website. Right now, it's only a landing page. We plan on adding more features later as we are able to develop a budget. Mm-hmm. But right now, you just go to scifibridge.com. There's a subscribe page where you sign up for the newsletter, or an about page where we sort of explain what we're all about. If you subscribe, you'll then get our welcome email that kind of explains more in detail what you should be expecting, and you'll start receiving our promos and be notified about the giveaways personally and things like that.
Sounds good. And I did have one last fan question I forgot to throw in there, so I want to throw it in there so they don't feel left out. It's from your buddy Jason Onspot, and he wants to know,
I saw this.
when are you going to go indie already?
I know. I always complain to them about some of the limitations I have in traditional as far as running sales and things like that. And so the answer is simple. If this new manuscript I was talking about called Vicarious doesn't land with any of the major publishers, because I'm only shopping it to the major ones, which, as you know, not easy to get. It's received a few passes, all with positive feedback, which is encouraging because that is rare. I usually don't get any feedback. But if that doesn't land anywhere, I am considering self-publishing it and seeing what this is all about.
There we go. That works. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day and coming on 30-minute author interviews. We appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Well, everybody, that is all the time that we have for this week's episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. We hope you join us every Wednesday for a brand new author interview. And don't forget to head on over to Leigendarium.com. At Leigendarium.com, you can find the show notes for this episode, and in the show notes, you'll find the giveaway where Rhett Bruno is giving 3 people the chance to win an ebook copy of his latest novel, From Ice to Ashes. And you'll also find the link to our sponsor, Galactic Satori Chronicles by Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks. Check them out and let them know that you heard about them right here on 30-Minute Author Interviews. And have you missed any of our past episodes? Head on over to youtube.com/Leigendarium to check them out. And we'd also like to thank a few of our Patreon subscribers. We would like to thank Nick Breaker, Diane S. Loftus, Third Scribe, and Maggie Stewart Grant. They are supporting 30-Minute Author Interviews through Patreon, and they're also receiving the very special Patreon-only podcast called 10 Questions With. So visit patreon.com/Leigendarium and find out how you can support 30-Minute Author Interviews as well. Until next time, stay legendary. Last week, they just... dang it!